Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new series I'm doing called What's Wrong with Battlefield 4. And this actually doesn't only apply to Battlefield 4. Really, Battlefield 3, Hardline, BF1, BF5, potentially 2042. But really, you only get to see the effects of it in 4 and Hardline because those are the only games that you can rent servers and change tick rates. So, this series is going to be a little more technical. So if you're not really technically inclined, you don't really care about what's happening kind of behind the scenes, might not be for you, but for those of you that are interested in this, then stick around. It's going to be an interesting one. So for the first, episode here, we're going to go over healing, specifically with the medkits. So you probably haven't seen these being used a whole lot, and there's some good reasons for that. I think a big one is you don't get healed by the medkit when you're suppressed, which is kind of stupid. I don't think it should be like that, but that's the way it is. And also, the medkit, of course, you can't run and heal with it, really. Once you're out of its range, then you're no longer getting healed. So, yeah, regardless, there is this strange medkit thing. So, you may be wondering what the problem is with the medkit, and I think this problem is actually maybe the main reason a lot of you don't use it. So, let's look on the surface value. The medkit is supposed to heal you 12 HP per second, right? Which is actually pretty good. It's better than the throwable med pack because that's only 10 HP per second. And you can heal a bunch of people at once. So if you're a medic on a choke point, something like Locker, throwing a med kit down, you could be healing, close to 100 HP per second, which is a lot of points for you, a lot of healing for your team. However, as you're about to see, we're on 200 hertz right now. If I go ahead and damage myself, if we're standing next to the med kit, look how slow that is, right? It doesn't look like 12 HP to me, and obviously it's because it isn't. And once regen kicks in, regen's much faster than the medkit heals, so which of course is stupid, right? Why would regen be faster than the medkit? But it's not supposed to be like that, but that's just the way it is. And we're going to go into why in this video, and ways that I think they could have fixed it and ways that I have fixed it in Warsaw Revamped. So let's start with why. So just kind of from a very basic level, if you don't really understand tick rate, if you just kind of heard the term, not sure what it means, essentially what it means is, on 120 hertz or a 200 hertz server, 120 times per second, 60 times per second, 200 times, whatever, the server is going to go through everything on the map. So all of the vehicles, all of the players, medkits, entities, everything you can possibly think of, and it's going to update them. So it's going to update their physics, right? Their velocity, their acceleration, all that stuff, and it's just going to update everything about them, right? If you're shooting, it's going to, take away ammo from you. It's going to fire bullets at people. It's going to simulate those bullets, all of the above. So generally, with a server tick rate of 60 hertz, the server is going to be simulating everything 60 times per second. Your client as well, but the server is going to be sending that data to your client at 60 hertz, right? Now, on the flip side of things, your client is simulating things at 60 hertz, 120 hertz, whatever it may be. However, you're not actually sending the packets 60 times per second. Regardless of the server tick rate, you're going to be sending at 30 hertz. So, which, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think generally with like cable internet, which is what most people probably have, at least in the United States, your upload speed's going to suffer more than your download speed. So it makes sense that you want to be downloading a little more than you're uploading. However, maybe there's some other advantages too of having a higher client send rate, right? Just like having a higher frame rate in your game, you're going to have a lower latency. So if you decide to click and shoot or something, then that information is going to be sent sooner potentially to the server, make it to the server sooner. You're not going to die around corners as often, and just generally it's going to feel a little more responsive. But that's kind of besides the point. But we'll get back to that kind of later on. So included, as I mentioned earlier in that update, is the medkit, right? So all the medkits and also that big commander crate that comes from the sky, because that's a medkit too. They kind of just look around in the range in kind of some sort of circle in the radius, and everybody in that range, it says, hey, you're in range of a medkit, and then the thing on your client that manages what your health is, or not on your client, but on your soldier that manages your health, it uses that every time it updates, and if it sees that you're inside of a medkit range, then it'll give you some health. So 12 per second on 30 hertz, of course, means 0.4. And if you're on 60 hertz, of course, as they should have, they scaled it. And you'll be getting 0.2 instead, right? Because 0.2 at 60 times per second is 12 HP. So everything checks out so far. Sounds good, right? So you may be wondering, well, why do you heal so much slower? And specifically, you might have noticed this is 200 hertz. I was healing less than 2 HP per second, which is, there's a very distinct ratio of how fast you heal. Or on 200 hertz, you heal less than 2 HP per second because the tick rate is, 6 to 7 times 30 hertz. So you may be thinking, oh, so maybe the medkit only updates 30 times per second, and that's why. And you would be only half right, but also not. Yeah, it's a complicated thing. So the reason the medkit is doing these strange things is because, as I mentioned, when your soldier sees you're within the range of a medkit, every time it updates, then it will say, hey, okay, add some health, and then forget that we're near a medkit and let the medkit tell us we're near a medkit again. Of course, that's an efficient way to do it because you're not going to want to track the medkits around you exactly. Of course, let them tell you, and then, if as soon as they stop telling you you're in range, then you're not in range, right? Simple enough. So same implementation everywhere so far. Here's where it starts to get strange. So as I mentioned, you send information to the server at 30 hertz, and that information includes your inputs. But as I mentioned as well, your inputs update at the server's tick rate. So 120 hertz, you have 120 update inputs per second. So you're sending that at 30 hertz, so it follows that you're going to be batching those entries, those inputs, right? So you're going to send them in batches of 4 for 120 hertz or 2 for 60 hertz. And the server is going to receive those in a given tick. And here's where the bad implementation is, and the kind of the confusing part. Your health updates whenever entry inputs change. So not necessarily change, but when they're updated, right? So 120 times per second, your health is going to be updated. However, because the way they're batched in sections of, maybe 2 inputs in one single tick, the problem is, say you're next to a medkit, the medkit has alerted your health that essentially it's in range of a medkit, right? That first input is going to be processed. The game's going to give you HP, and then it's going to forget you're near a medkit, like I said earlier, and then it's going to go ahead and process the second input in the same tick, right? So that means that the medkit will not have another chance to tell you you're within the range of a medkit because this is all still in one tick. So if you're on 200 hertz, you'll have either 6 or 7 inputs every second, depending on how the times line up. And 6 or 7 times per second, your health, or 6 or 7 times per tick, your health will be updated, but only one of those will actually give you the health from the medkit. So I think it's hopefully making sense to you why this happens. On 60 hertz, for example, you'll really only get 30 hertz of updating scaled at 60 hertz health. So you'll be getting 0.2 health instead of 0.4 at 30 hertz, which means 6 HP on 60 hertz, which is not very great, So that's why it is. And so you may be thinking to yourself, well, how can we solve this? Maybe we can just stop scaling it if it's just going to update at 30 hertz anyway. And yes, that is an option, but I think that it's important to note the limitations of that option. So for one, if we ever choose to update the client send rate to something higher, then, well, for one, we'll have to go back and add that scaling back in and maybe even scale it differently depending on what we decide to do the send rate as. And what about players that have, network limited options on? Because there are some options in the game to optimize your network usage, which can lower the frequency of your updates to the server. So suddenly those players that are sending, that can't handle the network requirements are going to be healing slower. And that's true in vanilla as well as it stands. As I mentioned, it only updates when your inputs are updated. So that means if you have outgoing packet loss right now in game, you're not going to heal at all until the packet loss stops. Generally, it'll recover in such a way where the med pack will still heal you a couple times if you were frozen for a second. But med kits will stop working altogether. Regeneration will also catch up too, but yeah, med kits will stop working. So not great, right? And so that's not a wonderful solution because you still have that problem, and it kind of limits our flexibility for changing send rates. And I guess if you also do that, maybe this one's less likely, but if players on their own manage to send higher frequencies, right, and there's no scaling, then suddenly they're going to be healing, 2, 3, 4 times as fast as intended. On 120 hertz, you'll have players healing almost 50 HP per second, right? Which, of course, you could argue they're already, cheating or something anyway, so what difference does it make? But just kind of worth pointing out, it's not the best solution, right? So the solution that makes more sense, and I think is how they should have implemented it in the first place, is to update everybody's health independently on the server side, regardless of what the client's doing. As long as the client is in-game, the server should be updating their health. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken, because, interestingly enough, the client's health is updated every single frame independently of whether or not they send inputs, but only for your corpse. So essentially, when you die, then your health kind of gets updated. The health of the soldier, of course, when you die, you're kind of decoupled from that soldier. It's no longer you. And that soldier will continue to be updated every single frame until, enough time passes where the corpse disappears, which is 15 seconds. So, it's kind of a weird thing. So, of course, I just hijacked that, and now I just update the rest of the health and decoupled it from input, and now everything works as you'd expect. So I'll go ahead and kind of demonstrate that quickly, and you'll see kind of what I mean there. But kind of a strange one, but there's going to be a common theme that you'll notice with a lot of these bugs, which is input-related things with tick rates. Interesting concept. Of course, you could argue maybe the Frostbite engine wasn't initially designed for high-frequency updates, which it probably wasn't, right? Back in even early BF4 days, everything was 10 hertz. And that's how it is in BF3 too, I believe, still. So, Battlefield 4 is the first title that even really expanded past that, and they didn't really need variable tick rates after that, even, in the first place anyway, because you can't have variable tick rates anymore in newer games. So if you look at my health now, everything's healing normally at 12 HP per second. So suddenly the medkit seems like a potentially viable option again. But I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. I know this series might be a lot to follow, so feel free to kind of slow it down and watch it back, try and get a grasp of things, and maybe if you're a DICE developer, maybe you can come back and fix this in vanilla BF4. Otherwise, it'll be all of these fixes that I mentioned will be available in Warsaw Revamped. So, thank you for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.